You're 8 years old, crouched in wet grass, and your palms won't stop sweating around a spear built for someone twice your size. Nobody explained what this morning means. Nobody had to. Every adult around you is quietly waiting for the answer to one question. Are you still a child, or are you about to stop being one? You've watched this happen before. Other kids walking out at dawn carrying a weapon for the first time, coming back at dusk somehow rearranged. Some returned standing straighter, pulled closer to the fire with a new kind of respect. Others came back looking exactly the same on the outside, but something invisible had shifted, and they never quite belong the same way again. Now the group is moving through the grass, and you're moving with it, because there is no version of this morning where you get to turn around. Curiously, here's the detail that should stop you cold. When researchers actually studied how these groups raised their children, they found the opposite of the brutal caveman cliché. These people carried their kids, healed them, buried them with a tenderness that reads as almost modern, which makes the next part stranger. Because if they guarded their children that closely, why would those same tender adults hand an 8-year-old a spear and walk them towards something that bleeds? Start with the assumption almost everyone makes and gets wrong, that this was about food, a starving group needing every possible hand the moment a child could stand. It sounds logical. It's also false. A small child was a genuinely terrible hunter, weak-armed, short-reached, with no patience and no timing. Risking a spear and 8 years of investment on a child's hunting ability made no practical sense. The first kill was never really about meat.
What it was actually about is stranger and heavier. A line. On one side, you were fed and carried because you might one day become useful. On the other, you were useful now, and a group living this close to starvation could not afford passengers indefinitely. Every person eventually had to earn their share. The only real question was when. The moment you understand that, the spear in your hands stops being a weapon. It becomes a door. Picture the actual mechanics of it. The animal ahead was chosen deliberately. Young, slow, something that couldn't fight back. The adults did nearly all the real work, tracking, cornering, wearing it down, absorbing the actual danger themselves. Then they stepped back and left you the final blow. It wasn't a fair fight, and it was never meant to be one. The test was never whether you could hunt. It was whether, when the moment arrived, you could override every instinct screaming that this was wrong and act anyway. And somewhere behind you, your mother let this happen. The same person who knew the exact sound of your cry in the dark watched the group hand her child a weapon and lead them toward blood. And she didn't stop it. That wasn't coldness. In a world with no medicine and no guarantees, a child who never crossed that line stayed soft, and soft did not survive what was coming. Letting you go was one of the deepest acts of love available to her. This is exactly the kind of detail this channel exists to dig up. Subscribe, because what the evidence reveals about ancient childhood is nothing like the version most people carry around in their heads. Here's what the bones themselves confirmed. Archaeologists studying ancient burial sites kept finding children interred with the full weapon kit of adult hunters, spear points, hunting gear, laid beside bodies that hadn't finished growing. That doesn't happen by accident or sentiment alone. Someone made a deliberate judgment that this particular child had crossed the line before their body had even become an adult's. And this wasn't isolated. Sites separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, populations that never met or shared a language, kept turning up the identical fingerprint. children's teeth recording a sudden dietary shift at a certain age, young skeletons carrying the healed injuries of people doing adult work far too early, small bodies buried with adult honors. When groups with zero contact independently invent the exact same ritual, it isn't culture. It's a solution, the pressure of survival forced out of every human population on the planet the same way. Which raises the darker question. What happened to the children the filter caught, the ones who froze? Plenty did, hands shaking, spear trembling but never falling. And in that frozen second, the group learned something about that child that time wouldn't fully erase. Not that they were bad, just not yet ready, in a world where readiness was close to everything. A modern child who freezes gets another chance next month. A prehistoric child who froze forced the group into a real, unspoken calculation about whether to keep investing in someone who might never carry their share. But there's a second, quieter way to fail that most retellings miss entirely, and it's the detail that makes these people look chillingly wise. The group wasn't only watching whether you crossed the line, they were watching how. A child who struck and couldn't stop, whose face showed hunger instead of horror, ease instead of reluctance, wasn't a promising hunter. That child was a warning. A group with no laws, no jail, and no way to remove a dangerous member except the worst way possible couldn't afford someone who felt nothing while taking a life, because today's animal was tomorrow's rival at the fire. What they were actually searching for was the narrow path between the two failures, real horror, no enjoyment of it, and the ability to act anyway, then stop the instant it was done. Fear plus control. Not the absence of the scream, but mastery over it. Then comes the reversal, and it's the most human part of the whole day. That night, for the first time in your life, the meat moving hand to hand around the fire is food you provided. You've spent every meal of your existence on the receiving end. Tonight, you're a giver. You don't have words for what that does to an 8-year-old, but it lands somewhere permanent, and it's addictive enough to quietly steer the rest of your life. This is how a frightened child becomes a hunter who wants to hunt, not through punishment, but through the deepest belonging a person can feel. The change doesn't end at dawn. It shows up in 100 small shifts nobody says aloud, where you're allowed to sit, who speaks near you, an adult who never noticed you now offering food unprompted. Most tellingly, the way younger children start watching you, the way you used to watch the ones who'd already crossed. You've become the next test waiting for them. And there's a part nobody warns the child about, because it happens after everyone else has moved on. The nights. For a while, sleep isn't simple. You keep seeing the animal's eye in that last second, and you wonder if something's wrong with you for feeling it, because everyone else around the fire seems fine. What you don't know yet is that every one of them went through the same haunted nights after their own first kill. They just never said so. Learning to hold something heavy without letting it show is part of what the moment teaches. Slowly, the weight becomes something you can carry rather than something that breaks you. That's the real work of the first kill, not the strike itself, but the rewiring that follows. Proof, learned young and painfully, that fear isn't the enemy to eliminate. A child with no fear at all was the dangerous one. What survival actually asked for was harder than courage as we usually picture it. Not the absence of the scream, but mastery over it. Carried quietly, generation after generation, all the way down to whatever it is your own life is asking of you right now.